Brendan O'Neill, thank you so much for joining me. How serious is this news about Boris Johnson?
It's very serious. I think, given that we are in the midst of a pandemic and Boris Johnson is the person who is leading the fight against it, I think it's pretty worrying that he has come down with the virus to such an extent that he has had to go to hospital. So I think it is a bit of a blow. I think people are quite shocked. We do have to bear in mind that Downing Street is saying that it's a precautionary step, that his symptoms are not gravely serious, they just are persistent. So he wasn't taken to hospital in an ambulance. It was all very civilized and it was all very calm. So it looks like it's still okay, but I do think that the British people have woken up this morning feeling quite shocked. We had the Queen's message, which was quite uplifting, and then almost straight away we heard that the Prime Minister was in hospital with the virus. So people definitely feel a bit shaken.
I'll get to the Queen's message in a second. How do you think Boris Johnson has handled this disaster so far?
I actually think he's done pretty well, all things considered. I think it's a really difficult thing to deal with. One thing I really dislike, there's been lots of Boris bashing in relation to this virus. I think there's certainly criticisms that could be made of the government. I think there is the question of whether they responded quickly enough. I think there's definitely a shortage of urgent protective equipment in the National Health Service in particular. And we also need to get testing up and running very fast. And at the moment, that doesn't seem to be happening. So there are definitely criticisms that can be made. But I really dislike the way in which Boris is almost held responsible for the virus itself. And some people on the left in particular are talking as if he is responsible for everyone who dies from this. And some are even saying that he doesn't care if people die. I think those kind of criticisms are incredibly unfair. I think he has given a pretty good lead. He's given a pretty good steer to the nation. He's struggling to cope with a virus that is unpredictable and which is new and which is novel. And I do think most people feel like they want to get behind him in this project to make sure that the virus doesn't hit the country any harder than it already has.
Well, we've seen the same sort of blame throwing at Donald Trump. It seems to me a media left is looking for conservative villains to some extent. Not that Donald Trump's handled this perfectly either, but there you go. Is Britain now seeing the light? I mean, on the one hand, you've got a mounting death toll, which is rather scary. I'm not sure how many of those deaths are actually coronavirus alone or associated with other illnesses. On the other hand, you're hearing some people saying, well, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Where is it?
Well, people really want a light at the end of the tunnel, and we know that there are lots of discussions in government at the moment about when the lockdown can end, because I don't think it can go on much longer. And, you know, one of the things that worries me is that I think a long-term lockdown, we now hear experts talk about 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. I mean, that to me just is incredibly sinister and would be more destructive than the disease itself. But it's become quite difficult to have an open discussion about the lockdown and about our response to the virus, because anyone who raises these questions is instantly shouted down as someone who doesn't care about old people, doesn't care about vulnerable people, and wants the virus to win. I mean, there is an incredibly censorious atmosphere around these kinds of questions. But people around the country are asking, when will the lockdown end? Where is the light at the end of the tunnel? And it's got to come sooner rather than later, because the danger, of course, is that in our determination to combat this disease, we will end up destroying economic life in this country. Millions of people have lost their jobs. Millions of people are living on a low wage or on welfare benefits. Those numbers have grown exponentially over the past 2 weeks. We've got to be very careful that we don't fight the virus only to create a man-made economic catastrophe. And I think that's the lesson we've got to really take going forward.
Oh, we've had the same debate here, but luckily it's not supercharged because the deaths have been so much lower. But the same thing. Hysterical media reporting meets censorious, you only care about the money, not the dead, not these old people, and it kills rational debate. But thankfully, we are getting to the point where we are hearing people say, well, we do need an exit strategy. It doesn't have to be the 6 months, and certainly in our case it does not. The Queen's message, what did you make of it?
I really liked it, actually. I'm a Republican. I've always been a Republican. I don't think we should have a monarchy in this country, which is not a very popular view in the UK. But I found her message very moving, actually. And what was really striking about it is that it was such a refreshing contrast to what we've been hearing from a lot of the media class and a lot of the political class and a lot of the chattering class, which is just this constant doom-mongering, the idea that the virus is the worst thing that's ever happened. We'll never get over it. It's going to kill loads and loads of people. There's a real ugly, defeatist attitude and atmosphere around this virus, which I think is scaring a lot of people and spreading a lot of fear. Then along comes the Queen and says, look, we will succeed.
Yes, I thought the references to the war were very subtle, World War II, but subtly reminding Britons that they have gone through worse and they did meet again. And they'll survive this as well, although, of course, a number of people will die in the meantime, and that is something to regret and to try to avoid as much as possible. Brendan O'Neill, thank you so much indeed for your time.